Hey there and welcome back to another My Hero Academia review. And today we'll be talking about the latest episode to drop, Tenko Shimura Origin, which delves into the breakdown of Shigaraki's family life, showing off the abuse and family tragedy that led him to All For One, and eventually put him on the path to become one of the most deranged and dangerous villains of all time. Whilst also continuing on with Shigaraki's battle with Re-Destro, although that definitely felt like it took a backseat this episode. And honestly, all this information being revealed about Shigaraki couldn't have come soon enough. It's been 5 seasons of mystery and build-up with only tiny little hints as to what kind of horrors lay in his past. And because of that, he's never really been able to grow past that gamer man-child archetype. And honestly, I couldn't have cared less about him. But as they start to peel back his layers and reveal this deeply traumatized man who's been pushed over the edge one too many times, I definitely feel like it's easier to connect with him and care about his arc. And before we get properly started, I would like to say that I have read the manga and I'm aware of any relevant future plot points and details. But for the purpose of these reviews, I really only like to talk about what the anime's presented up to now and not go back and forth between the manga and the anime. It just helps keep the review streamlined and allows anime-only fans to watch along and join in too. But with all that being said, let's jump into the video. We start off the episode catching back up with Twice, who's tending to Toga with his doubles, trying to make a healthy copy of her so they can give her a blood transfusion. And I liked this scene. It doesn't really serve any plot purpose, but just once again reiterates that Twice has really come into his own as a character in the last couple of episodes, and especially in the last episode. And I guess it's also there to show you that Toga's not going to be cropping up again until the end of this arc. She's down for the count. And also this scene had the funniest line of the season for me. Twice speculating that Darby would know a good plastic surgeon to help Toga. And I mean, it's just so clearly false, but said with such certainty that it makes it doubly funny. That he'd think that Darby, who has crispy bacon skin attached via staples to his face, would know someone who could fix her up. It's kind of presented as a throwaway line, but when you think about it, it's just so ridiculous. And after the intro plays, we come to a scene that honestly, I didn't care much for. Spinner versus Trumpet, where Spinner tries to take on as much of the MLA as he can in order to shoulder some of Shigaraki's burden. And honestly, this scene just felt like wasted potential, because it's just an add-on. It doesn't delve into Spinner at all really, or give much motivation to his character. We do learn from Trumpet that Spinner was a shut-in who hid away from the world and felt rejected because of his mutant quirk, but that he became inspired by the hero killer Stain, which of course led him to join the League of Villains. But he was always the reluctant member. But now in the last episode, he's basically become a Shigaraki zealot and wants to help him set the world on fire. And this is cool development for him to become super ride or die for Shigaraki, but I don't think they've adequately shown the transition. There were cuts made to this arc, and it feels like Spinner got the chop. But since you still need to deal with Trumpet, they did have to show this part. And it's a shame. All he needed was an episode to shine. That's all Toga and Twice and Shigaraki are getting for their big moments. And it sent them into the stratosphere of character development. And it's clear Darby's getting set up for big things too, and Compress is kind of like a dark, gentle criminal. You don't need to develop him that much. But Spinner's the mutant, the unique one. And despite all of that, he feels like the most human one. So it would have been nice to actually see some true development on screen for him. We shouldn't just have to assume what's happened off screen. Or at least we shouldn't have to for such big character moments. And then we finally cut back to the upcoming fight between Shigaraki and Re-Destro. And honestly, I was pretty hyped for this. Re-Destro is not a particularly inspiring or interesting villain, but his quirk is cool, so that's probably enough for me to enjoy the scene. I also enjoyed Shigaraki putting him in his place in this scene, telling him that he's an idiot for squandering his numbers advantage and not joining the fight from the start. Because honestly, the MLA probably would have won if that was the case. But now, Shigaraki has him in a one-on-one with Gigantomachia on the way as well, so yeah, I doubt this guy lasts much longer than an episode at best. They have a very destructive early exchange before Re-Destro catches his hands and starts to crush them between his fingers. And first of all, ouch, but why does Shigaraki even let him do this? I'm pretty sure he could just activate his quirk, couldn't he? Now that he can control it, can't he just dust this guy straight away? Why let him hurt you like this? But at least all this pain causes him to remember that his sister used to always lead him by the hand when he'd cry, so I guess that's something. And honestly, his hand getting crushed was pretty gnarly, but at least it kickstarts his backstory flashbacks. And then of course he decides he will use his quirk after all, and gets yeeted for his trouble. And man, he's really going through the wars in this scene. And of course, he then has a psychotic break as a result of all this, and starts scratching at his skin pretty intensely before he starts launching himself at Re-Destro. And does he have another secret quirk that makes him inhumanly agile and fast now? Or is this just good old-fashioned anime rule of cool? Because he goes absurdly fast and jumps absurdly high here. And in response to this, Re-Destro charges up to 80% output and blows up the area they're in, which of course gives Shigaraki another psychotic break as he remembers his kind grandparents. And that despite their kindness, he wanted them to protect him, but they didn't. And then Re-Destro gets a phone call from Skeptic, who's freaking out because Gigantomachia has turned up at the city and is tearing the MLA a new one as he makes his way towards Shigaraki. So yeah, Re-Destro's toast. No coming back from this one. Especially as he realizes that despite him being immensely strong, Shigaraki has no fear and even managed to briefly touch him, pushing aside his survival instincts. And honestly, as a passionate Re-Destro hater, this feels so good. I'm loving seeing the realization that maybe his plan has failed and that he's bitten off a bit more than he can chew at this point. And all the while, Shigaraki doesn't even need to try, as the flashbacks about his family just keep making him stronger, more alert, and faster. And this is where we get to the tragic heart of the episode. Shigaraki's dad was an abuser because he was bitter that his mother abandoned him to keep him safe. So of course, that makes him feel justified in his treatment of his son, who wants to be a hero. So he punishes him, leaving him alone in the cold, not letting him eat, dragging him around by the scruff of his neck, and even hitting him. What a lovely man he seems to be. And honestly, the grandparents and his wife are really no better for enabling him to treat, a 4-year-old kid like that? Jesus! And it gets so bad that Shigaraki develops a nervous itch that only happens when he's at home. And I get that his mum loves him and treats him nicely, but no excuses from me. Especially since it only seems to be Shigaraki that cops it. God, it's even worse that the grandparents do nothing, because they're not stuck married to him. I mean, even Shigaraki reflects that all he ever wanted from his mum and grandparents was for them to stand up for him against his dad. God, this was depressing and kind of rage-inducing. Anyway, one day, his sister finds a photo of their dad and grandma in her hero costume and decides with Tenko that they want to be heroes together. Until their dad finds out, and in her fear, the sister sells him out, even though it was her. Jesus, goes to show how bad the dad was that she so willingly threw him under the bus out of fear. But I don't really blame her. The unforgivable part is the rest of the family stands around and lets him get hit. Mother of the year. Grandparents of the year. Jesus. And then they leave him outside in the dark and cold. And it's at this point that the dad actually has the audacity to start to regret things, and the mum decides that this is the right moment to say, "Oh, we won't follow your rules anymore if you hit our son. Lady, the kid should already be strapped into the car, and you should all be leaving this guy." And this is where it goes from sad to utterly disturbing, as Shigaraki, in his despair, manifests and loses control of his quirk, accidentally killing the family dog, and then his sister who comes to apologize and console him. Jesus, and then he has a full-on breakdown and accidentally kills his mum and grandparents because he subconsciously hates them for protecting his dad and brushing aside his pain. And then they have this sad little moment of his mum running to him even though she's dying, trying to help him. And yeah, it was sad, but I don't know. I haven't forgiven them just yet, so I struggled to care. And then the dad turns up, and his best idea is to wallop his son with a garden tool. So he dies. Good. Justice. That's what you get for abusing your son, mate. And now, because of you, he's a full-on deranged supervillain. Lovely. Pretty disturbing that his son fully intends to murder him in that moment, but I guess he's a small child that's been abused for years, so I can get past it. And then there's that final ominous line after his dad's dead. "I didn't itch anymore." Yikes. But also, that's a complete lie. We've seen that itch several times. Anyway, the preview then gives us the promise of even more of his past, with his transition from Tenko Shimura to Tomura Shigaraki. So that should be exciting. And that brings us to the end, and this episode was heavy, and it really makes him look like a much more fully fleshed out character, and honestly explains a lot of his mannerisms and character traits. It's really gut-wrenching to think about how terrified he was about his own quirk, and just reaching out for help without really understanding what he was doing. And even seeing him feel like he wants them dead because they didn't stand up for him. It's actually really well played out, and it's pretty clear that he didn't really grasp the concept of the finality of death until that moment, because you see how devastated he is by the loss of his family. Except for his asshole of a dad, because, screw that guy. And I think it's pretty easy to blame Nana Shimura for giving up her son, but honestly, no. No excuse to bash your kid, so tough luck. Because apart from All for One, it's literally all this dude's fault for everything that Shigaraki's done. He put him on this path with his cruelty. That being said though, those are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the episode? Like it? Hate it? Make sure to leave a comment and let me know.